Hello, everybody. So as people are filing in, we'll just wait a little bit for people to join, and we'll get started in just under a minute. But welcome. If you like, you can maybe pop in the chat and let us know where you're from. See, people have already started. This is great. It's what I like to see. I'm here in sunny London, as you can see behind me. It's very sunny here. Despite the orange glow on my face, that's not natural. It's the beautiful WeWork lighting. But... oh, we got lots of folks from the States, one from Italy, France. Oh, this is very nice. Nice selection of people. And the numbers are just steadily growing here. I reckon we can just get started anyway. I'll see if I can share my screen so that we can, there we go. Parfait. So welcome to the second of the How We Document webinars that are brought to you by Zero Height. I'm sure that you've all devoured the report that we've put together on the state of design system and design system documentation. So today we're going to be focusing on the interesting area of transitioning tools. I'll do the full spiel of why we decided to focus on transitioning tools in a little bit, just when we kick off with the questions and when I introduce my lovely panelists that are here today. But beforehand, we've got a little bit of housekeeping. So first off, you can use that QR code there to download. I'm guessing that's to download the report. I haven't actually checked, but you know, I'm sure that it is. So if you haven't read the report yet, you can just go to zeroheight.com/howwedocument, how-we-document. And you can download the report there. Just need to put in your email address so that you can download that. It's jam-packed with insight. It's ridiculous amount of pages, and there's so much to go through there. It took us a good sort of 5 months to make our way through the data from all of you lovely people who filled out the survey. Just over 500. Fantastic. It gives us a good snapshot of where we're at as an industry. Also, it's worth that we have a community for Zero Height called Zeros, which you can jump in there, and we kind of have a lot of design system discussion in there. We also have a specific webinars channel that's very good for asking questions, both whilst the panel's on, but also afterwards as well. And we can try and answer those as best we can. And if you need any assistance, you can jump in the chat, and we've got the lovely Neff from Zero Height who's moderating that for us today. She'll also be moderating the questions as they come through. And so that is very important to note. There's two portions to the panel today. There's a whole bunch of questions that we have for Sarah and Michelle. But there's also an opportunity for you folks to ask your questions specifically around sort of transitioning tools, growing your design system, sort of transitioning between the stages of maturity, all of that kind of lovely meaty area of change. So please ask those in the chat. And then Neff will curate those and send them to us. So for the second half of the webinar, we can make our way through those questions as well. We're also recording this, so hope that's okay with everyone. And we'll send the link to the recording of this a few days after we finish today. The chat is open. And the one thing we do say is we do have a code of conduct, so please don't be a jerk. That's pretty much the main rule. Unfortunately, if you are a jerk, you will get kicked out. So we do actively moderate, but this is a place to be nice. No, first off, I should talk about the upcoming webinars. Another couple of webinars that are coming up on the How We Document series. So on the 15th of March, we have one that's all about scaling design systems. So focusing on how you grow your team and grow your design system. And then we have a special one on the 22nd of March, which is part of our Amplify series that the lovely Michelle, who is here today, runs there. So she's doing a series of webinars and lots of other things throughout the year to amplify the voices of underrepresented people in the design system and wider design community. So we're actually running a Women in Tech Wikipedia edit-a-thon, which I think that there's a blog post on zeroheight.com/blog that you can go and read more about that. But that's coming up on the 22nd of March. So without further ado, I reckon we should get started with this webinar. So today, so I can introduce myself quickly. I'm Luke Murphy. I'm a design advocate at Zero Height. I'm actually run the design advocate department. Been here for a while, and my background's in sort of head of design, design leadership, design ops kind of space. My pronouns are he, they. And I am the world's biggest Josie and the Pussycats fan. So I can hand it over now to our lovely panelists. We have Sarah Veselov, who is the Director of Design at Honeycomb.io. Do you want to give yourself a little bit of an intro, Sarah?
Yeah, sure. Director of Design at Honeycomb. Gosh, I've been doing this for a really long time. Leadership in design has kind of been where I've been at for the past, I want to say 10 years. Gosh, I feel like I'm aging myself. But I've been around since HTML was invented, started out in web design and web development. It's kind of been my passion. And yeah, she, her are my pronouns. And I also own a board game cafe here in Florida. So if you're ever down here, come check it out and hang out with me.
Which everybody does need to go and check out. I'm hoping to check it out next year when I'm over there in April. So as long as it's still running by then. And, you know, your design system. Yeah, okay, cool. And then other panelist is actually one of my colleagues, the lovely Michelle Chin, who is a design advocate at Zero Height as well, and has worked on design systems in her previous role at Citrix. So Michelle, do you want to give yourself a quick introduction?
Yeah, sure. So design advocate, I talk to a lot of customers and people looking to work on their design system, as well as I have my own trauma experience working with design systems and transitioning tools. So I'm happy to help people avoid any pitfalls that I've come across. Yeah, and I have a podcast, and my co-host and I are planning a road trip to visit Sarah and her board game cafe. So
brilliant. Apologies for dropping out there. I apparently did drop out, but I was in the middle of my spiel and just didn't even notice. So that's good. Welcome, Sarah and Michelle. Should we get cracking on the questions that we put together for you?
Let's do it.
Yep, great.
Let's do it.
Okay, so for a little bit of context, so from our How We Document survey, we realized that there's a lot of respondents who are using a variety of tools and sort of, you know, new trends that are happening within design ops and design systems, often requiring adopting new tools and leaving behind a lot of old ones that we've been using. So when we talk to new customers, they're often transitioning from one design tool to another. That is a really common experience. And we have found also, just talking in the wider industry, this is not something that is exclusive to people who are using Zero Height. Where I feel like at the moment with design systems, you know, taking off and maturing, most people have this experience of having to transition tools. And it can be a bit of a sticky process, and there's some pitfalls there, and there's some learnings that people get along the way. As Michelle said, maybe some trauma. So we wanted to talk about some of the best practices, lessons learned, and strategies on how you can smoothly transition. And we will be focusing on the tools, but, you know, as with everything, it does tend to work into other spaces as well of, you know, general ops and people and all the rest of it. So I suppose to start off with, a bit of a background info on both of you, so that people can get an idea of sort of your design systems background. So tell us a bit about your experience. Sarah, we'll start with you. Experience sort of working on design systems and transitioning tools and all the rest of it.
I'm going to talk about my most recent experience. I did a talk in Berlin at the Hatch conference last year about it, and I'm hoping to do a follow-up at another conference sometime this year that will be much more triumphant. But I think design systems and my experiences have been that, one, it's all about people. We talked about this a little bit, but when you focus too heavily on the tools, you can find yourselves in endless circles and debates that don't really matter. So for me, design systems is all about talking about the people. And my experience has been that, at Honeycomb, came in and there were no design files, there was nothing there, and we were at a stage where it was going to be really beneficial to build up a design system. And so it started with getting that buy-in and making sure that upper execs understood why it was important that we had everybody involved. And then it came down to, okay, so how are we going to do this with the tools? And this is almost the exact same thing every single time, almost to the point where I feel like, okay, I've done this before, but it's different every time. Michelle, I'm sure you have had the same experience, even though I felt like, okay, I've done this before, I've talked to the people, I've gotten their feedback, the tools are similar. It really was about understanding the needs, the wants, the constraints, the timelines, and then making sure that everybody felt comfortable with what we chose and the milestones that we set to move along. I don't know if that answers your question, but I feel like rather than just say we were doing XYZ for this, for me, that's every design system, right? That's it. It was the same thing at GitLab. So I was part of building the Pajamas open source design system for GitLab. I was the UX manager there. We didn't have a design system. I advocated for that design system. It was very different though. That was an open source one. And so the constraints and the needs and the wants were very, very different. And it was actually, I think, a lot easier, strangely enough, because we had this unbelievable community of people that were contributing and giving us feedback, versus when you're in a closed design system like at Honeycomb, where it really is very insular and it is very focused. And so you'd think that more cooks in the kitchen would be bad, but I've actually found the opposite. Those are like the two big systems that I've worked on recently. Very similar, very different.
Oh, I'm looking forward to diving into this. But before we get there, Michelle, do you want to give a bit of your background as well?
Yeah, sure. So I started working on design systems at Citrix, and even from like tiny grassroots little side project design systems all the way to scaling to one unified design system across all Citrix portfolio products. So that was a little bit insane. And then throughout those years, we were definitely migrating from different tools, one tool to another, in ways that I think like a lot of people might not have done before, because a lot of the tools are cloud-based now. So you're not dealing with just like files on a network server or like kind of more tangible stuff. So a lot of other weird things to consider, but then again, very much around how people are feeling and how to best support the people through the transition is really huge as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. Do you feel like that's perhaps one of the things that people forget to consider when they're transitioning tools, in that the support that people actually need? Because I don't know, I feel like I've definitely done this before when I've done major tool transitions. I think the biggest one that everybody did at some point, Sketch to Figma, right? You just go, oh yeah, it'll be easy. Well, we've got the roadmap planned out. We've got what we need to do. And you kind of forget the human part of it. Do you think that there's any other big sort of things that people forget when they're transitioning between tools?
I think like for me in my experience, like like the people aspect, but also like how long it's going to take. I think you can look at it on a calendar and say, okay, we can definitely, like stop using, one tool A and exchange it for tool B within like a month. But it's really like, it takes a lot longer because there's so much more involved with like, like designs in mid-flight. How are people going to do this? I need to learn how to use the tool, like a lot of other things. So it's not just, like the practical logistics of stopping one tool and starting another. There's a lot more involved, so it definitely takes a lot more time.
Yeah.
I think. Oh, sorry.
Go on, Sarah.
I think one of the big things that always trips up the process, at least in my experience, is is determining what the process is going to be, right? So you have this big effort that you put into of moving things over, and we've got our checklist and our milestones. But then once you do move over things, what does it look like when there's a new component? How are we going to do that? What does it look like if someone, and this often happens if you've got, so there are some companies that don't mandate tools, right? There are people using Figma here and Sketch here, and well, maybe not Sketch, but Adobe here. What does it look like to take those things and get them together and put them into one system? And so I often find that the hidden kind of friction is often in the processes and not anticipating that you've set yourself up for very complicated, almost unmanageable processes where you think, oh, it'll be easy. We'll just do X, Y, Z, this, that, and that. No one's going to do that. If people, you have to meet people where they're at, and you have to make sure that you're making things easy for people to do, so that in the moment when they're running up against deadlines and they have all these things on their plate, that you're enabling them to do the documentation, you're enabling them to use the system and contribute to the system in the way that maintains it and upkeeps it. Otherwise, you're going to end up with this kind of start-stop that I see in design systems where you have a big effort and then it dies for a little while and it gets really out of date, and then you're doing that. So I think that often you see this big effort and then it just kind of dies because no one really stopped to think about, well, what do we do after that? How do we keep this going? How do we make sure that people are contributing?
Yeah, to be honest, it feels like a lot of it comes down to this, I remember early in my career seeing somebody with the title of change management officer or change management manager and thinking, oh, well, that's excuse my French, bullshit title. And didn't really appreciate. I'm like, it's people just change. Like, why do you need to manage that? And I think that it's one of those things that people just really don't. It's a really undervalued area. And I think it's what it comes down to what you're talking about, Sarah, right? It's like actually it's almost like the communication around the processes and the people side of things that is one of the most important things that you can do when you're doing any kind of transition there. Have you found, I'm interested actually, because I think that there's two levels to that as well. There's the sort of low level, the people who are doing the work, the design system team, the people who contribute to the design system in this case. But then there is also that buy-in level as well, and that sort of level of change management. And I'm interested in talking a little bit about that. You were talking about the whole concept of having to get buy-in for doing these things and then almost like managing that process. Just curious, like, do you have any sort of learnings that you've picked up along the way of how to make that easier?
Oh boy, I don't know if there's anything that can make it easier, but I've learned a lot about what not to do.
Yeah.
And I've learned a lot about, really how I see my role now versus maybe when I was building at GitLab, manager versus director, and all of these, roles don't mean anything, but also they do, because where I sit now, I'm no longer necessarily contributing directly to that design system. I'm not in there in the files doing the things, but I understand what it is to be that person, and I understand the frustrations and the concerns and the need for that system to be up and running so that you can do all the things that you need to do. I also understand being at a level where you are getting asked on a daily basis, why isn't this being shipped? When are we going to get this done? And you have this kind of higher order of things that you need to keep the business going so that people remain employed. And so it's this tension between these two areas. And so, what I try to do is be that conduit and help, the people up above understand why the design system is important to help alleviate the stresses and the friction that the people on the ground are experiencing, and how that will help them perform better and be happier in their job. And then 2, help the people who are doing that understand why it's important for the people up above to see results and see the impact that this is going to have on the bottom line. And I think if if you can find a way to make those things happen and bring those pieces closer together, things will move along faster. The greatest struggles that I've always had have been in having to go between two parties that are like, well, I don't understand why they're asking for this now, and the other's going like, I think this is ridiculous. Like, they don't need more time to build this design system. They've had enough time, and trying to bring those two sides together. And the best way I can say is helping each side understand the other side better has been my greatest, the thing that's made it easier, if you can call it easier. If you can call it easier.
Yeah, it is interesting, because I do feel like that it's a common mistake that people make especially when they first get into like a leadership or a management position, where they're like leading a team or leading a project like that, where they assume that they're only fighting for one side. And you either become the team champion, or you become the sort of business champion and the leadership champion. And it's like, actually, the way that you make things work is to do both, and to almost just bring alignment for both.
Yeah. And sometimes it's not bringing alignment. Sometimes it's saying, we agree to disagree, but here's how we move things forward. And that's okay too. Like, you're not always going to have this, just like you're never going to find the perfect tool. You're not always going to agree, but you're going to have to disagree and commit and move forward and find a way.
Oh yeah, it's the greatest leader is a facilitator, not a dictator. It's
yes.
Yeah. I suppose on that, Michelle, on the flip side, and I suppose we did kind of cover it there because we were talking very much about both sides with the alignment. But do you have any learnings on the other side of, like, the team side of things? So, what do you think that managers and leads can do to help sort of that transition, when you're in that transition period, that you can do to make it easier for the teams?
Yeah, I think the big thing is like listening to what their concerns are and making sure that you're addressing them. So, and then making space for that too, because I think a lot of times people are like, oh yeah, we're just going to switch from tool A to tool B, and you'll pick it up because it's very similar. They're design tools, and you can go off and running. But especially like with Figma, it's a very different type of design tool. So there needs to be training, and making sure you provide that space for training. Because, I think a lot of times managers might take it for granted, like, oh yeah, you can just pick up another tool because it's like Illustrator and Sketch were very similar. But I think some people take it for granted, like, oh, like if someone really needs to figure out how to use Figma, they're gonna spend their evenings and weekends learning it because they need to know. But that's not always the case. People don't have that time, and people shouldn't be working outside of work to learn a tool. So before, when we transitioned, because we had to teach people how to use components and how to use components properly, how to build components properly, we had little like workshops on how to do this. We found some videos for people to like ramp up really easily to get started. And then we had a couple working sessions so people could feel comfortable, playing around with the tool, making components, asking questions. It was also really a really good leadership opportunity too, for some more of the senior designers to figure out how to teach others how to use the tools in the way that would help us. So a lot of it's just like, making sure we're addressing the concerns of the team, and making sure they feel comfortable through the transition, because it is hard. We're changing people's day-to-day workflows. Change is hard, even when we know it's for the best. So making sure that they can navigate that well.
It's taking the time as well, right? I think it's definitely one of the things that I've seen in the past, where one of the biggest pitfalls that people have is assuming that things can be done quickly. It's the analogy that I often use, is the building the car whilst it's hurtling down the highway at 100 miles an hour. And it's like, actually, you need to take that time and really invest in it's what you said, like training and playing with it and getting the feedback to save time in the future, because otherwise you end up with something that is a complete mess usually in the end.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. People form bad habits, right? Like if there aren't, guidelines and kind of ways of doing things as a team set in place, they'll start making up their own stuff to navigate and make meet deadlines for whatever deliverables. And that's kind of like what Sarah was saying. There's usually a big push to get like a design system done, and then there's like a big pause, and there's like awkward transition to a different tool, and then a big push to pick up the design system. But that in between, people start to kind of fake it till you make it, or kind of make their own way of doing things just to get by. And then you form bad habits, which then I think are really hard to correct later on when you have more guidelines and more of a process in place. So that's also a little dangerous.
Definitely. Sarah, I can see you itching to jump in.
Oh no, I am violently agreeing with everything Michelle's saying. I just feel like you're much more eloquent than I am. I'm a very like, oh yes, kind of. You're very like, yes, I can.
Get out.
I just love the way she explains everything.
It's my medication.
Yeah. I was going to say it's the years of podcasting experience too. So I don't know what my excuse then is for being so all over the place, but I do have I've got an interesting, I think it's a loaded question, and it's possibly a really simple one as well. Do you think it's better to transition multiple tools all at once, or transition one at a time? I mean, I know that this is usually, it feels like it's a simple question, but I don't actually think it is. And I'm curious if you've got any experience about, doing it one way and wishing you did it the other way. Sarah, do you want to go first?
I'm trying to think if I've experienced doing, like, I've definitely transitioned obviously one tool at a time, but I'm trying to think if I've ever transitioned more than one tool at a time. I don't think so.
No? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any, like, you absolutely shouldn't. I think that there are probably absolutely, I could see if you were moving from, say, and I'm not calling out any particular design tools here, but if you're moving from Adobe to, say, Figma, and you were standing up your zero height, I don't think that there's any benefit or value to waiting on your zero height while you're doing your Figma. I think that then you're just slowing down the process, and I don't think that those two things necessarily interfere with each other. So I think that it really would depend on whether or not there's any type of interference, or there's some kind of collision that's going to happen, in that sequence. But Michelle, I'd love to hear if you've done that.
Yeah, I haven't done like all at once, but I've done pretty quick, fast follows. Where we're transitioning from like a design tool, and then our design system documentation tool changes, and then but we kind of have to pause on the documentation a little bit just because we're transitioning the one tool. I think there's some times where we're like, okay, maybe we can start with our old design tool and use zero height, but then you have to change it all over anyway. So I think it's like kind of what Nick had mentioned in the chat, like rip that Band-Aid off, wearing oven mitts. So yeah, like definitely, I feel like if you can get it done quickly, right? Because the longer you can delay, the harder it's going to be, and it's just going to feel like a really big slog in the end.
I think you end up. I think that there is especially when you're dealing with large design teams, I think that there is a tendency to want to almost waterfall these, or have periods of sort of like spinning up between transitioning tools, where, I don't know, the thing that I found in the past is that you just end up with a lot of debt, and you end up with a lot of disconnected systems, or things where you've got, I don't know, lots of discrepancies where you've got half of the stuff in one tool and half of the stuff in another tool, or lots of duplication and nobody knows what the source of truth is.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it gets messy.
On that, I'm curious as well, because you mentioned around, Michelle, you mentioned around the time that it takes to transition. And I'm curious, like, how long should it take? And I suppose it does depend on the tool, obviously, but aside from saying longer than you think, is there anything else that you've found is a good way to, like, at least be able to estimate that?
Yeah, I think, like, it really depends on the tool and your team, but also like thinking if you can make the transition succinct enough so it's not like overextended where people are living in two different worlds. I think what's nice is if you do monthly planning or quarterly planning, like kind of wrap it tied into some of those milestones to help give people something like some sort of time frame to work with. That also works with like deliverables of like, okay, if we're doing monthly planning, this month is the last month that we're going to use the old tool. Anything we're delivering in future months will be from the new tools. So I think as long as you can try to compartmentalize it a little bit better, that can be helpful. But yeah, don't take too long. Definitely don't drag your feet.
Yeah, rip the Band-Aid off, right?
Yes, very much so.
And I suppose, so large, so I feel like that there is a difference when we're talking about transitioning just generally with the size of company you are, or more importantly, the size of the design team you are, or even the type of design system that you're dealing with. So like Sarah, I know you mentioned GitLab, you're dealing with a open source design system where you had a lot of contributors. I'm guessing a large community around it. I suppose, do either of you have any, or Sarah, let's start with you. Do you have any advice when you're trying to make any of these big...
Uh-oh.
Sorry about that. My connection just completely dropped out there. Yeah, do you have any advice around when you're trying to do these stages of change or transitioning when you're dealing with large communities or large design teams? Do you have any advice or learnings?
I will say that I've never personally had what I would consider a large design team, because I talk to some people and they tell me the size of their team and I almost pass out. I think like right now my team is like around 15 people, and I think that's around where it was at GitLab. To me, that's not that big. But at GitLab, we were dealing with a large community and a large amount of feedback, and I think that whether it's small or large, but particularly in a large community, and this goes back to leadership, but this is something that even if you're not a design manager or you're a director, the individual contributors are responsible, I think, for bringing along, is communicating out and making sure that you're socializing this effort and you're bringing people along. I cannot stress this enough, and it still surprises me how little people read, how little people listen. And I say this as the owner of a small business, but also as someone that does sometimes feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over and over again. But you need to. So you really have to make sure that you're continuing to put out there why the design system is important, who it's for. It's not just for the design team. And I think that when you say design system, people just default to thinking, oh, this is one of those pretty things for designers and it's going to help them and it doesn't have anything to do with me. You need the marketing and sales team to understand how it benefits them. You need developers, you need everybody to understand how they are going to benefit from this being there, so that they're part of maybe some of the sacrifice that comes in the roadmap. And maybe they're part of some of the conversations that come into how we get these things done. Especially when you have a bigger team, because the bigger the team, the more likely you are to have people who are in different mindsets and different places about the design system and what it brings and what the value is. There's this thing that we talk a lot about at Honeycomb in particular, and this has to do with adopter groups. I don't know if anyone here has read Crossing the Chasm.
Yes.
But this is, yes. So, this is something that I think relates not just to when you're marketing and you're talking about getting people to buy your product, but also when you're thinking about your own design system. You have to think of it as a product. You're going to have people who are the innovators and the early adopters, right? They're going to pursue new tech aggressively. They're going to look for something that's visionary, and they're going to be excited about it, even in the face of missing features and maybe it doesn't do everything. And they're going to be the loud out front people who are like, I remember I had one guy on my team at GitLab that was all about Figma way before there was any way we could use Figma. Drove me nuts every time. He knows who he is if he's listening to this. I'd be like, yes, Dimitri, I know you want to use Figma, right? But it just wasn't the right time. We couldn't do that as a company, you know, and then you're going to, but you have to mitigate those people and their voice and their wants and needs with the late majority and the laggards, the people that are skeptical, the people that really want good documentation. They want all of those features. They, you know what I mean? So I would think that not only working across your organization, but particularly when you have a large design org, you're going to have to learn where everyone falls and how to speak to them and how to bring them together.
Yes.
Yeah. So
it's, I think I was really scared that we're going to get into the conversation around what we should name design systems again.
No, design systems is great. I love it. Love it.
See, I still think it's a terrible name, but also it's really interesting. So I do think that there is, you know, a lot of what you were talking about there is that it's it's communication, what we said before, but I think one of the most undervalued roles in not only design system teams, but also with design teams generally is like a community manager or like an advocate style role, or somebody to fill that space that is responsible for like figuring out what your communication plan is, how you talk to people, how you know, communicate these changes and these things that happen. Nowhere near enough. I mean, how we document showed us nowhere near enough of those kind of roles existing within design systems at the moment, especially. It's interesting.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, Michelle, did you have anything to add in there, or?
Yeah, I think like, especially with like a large team, I definitely agree with everything Sarah says. Like, I think it's really important because people, while you're doing this transition, people are going to be like, what about my product? What about my feature? What about this? And people don't like to find out, they don't like to be surprised. So like giving them a heads up is really, really great. But I think from a logistical perspective, like with a large team, like that comms role is really important. So, you know, if you have design program managers or design ops people that can help with that transition, it's a really great, you know, like task that they can help coordinate and handle and run really smoothly. I think also there's like a logistical aspect too, like of intellectual property and stuff on the cloud. And if you're like ending a cloud service, like having to bring, you know, that down and saved it, or saving it, like we had to talk to our legal team to be like, can we just let these files go? And they're like, no, you have to export them all. And kind of handling all of that with a large team is tricky. But I think also part of it, like at one point we had like everyone, you know, on deck and downloading and exporting, and that was chaos. It was fun, but chaotic. But then the second time we transitioned, we were like, let's hire a contractor. And they helped do all the stuff. And I was like, man, that was like the best idea I've had. So yeah, I think there's a lot of like logistical things, and I feel like, you know, people shouldn't feel like it's on them to solve the one thing, like see how you might be able to outsource it or delegate and share responsibility. I think the more people that are involved with the helping of the transition, the better, right? Like people can feel that they're participating, actively engaged in making it happen, and invested in making it happen.
I had this conversation yesterday. Sorry.
No. I mean, I think we're all just sitting here, just emphatically agreeing with each other.
This is so great. I love it.
I do think that it's the ops side of it as well. Like what you were saying, actually, you know, you were saying you've got a contractor in to deal with all of the ops side of things. And I think that design ops is still an area that's growing, but the concept of ops has existed in our businesses for the last 30 years. I don't know why we still haven't seen, this is actually beneficial to have somebody who's just caring about all of the operational details. It feels like we're still a little bit behind on the product and design side of things, where it's like, this is actually something that's useful. Yeah, I do want to see more. I actually think that most design systems teams, especially in larger organizations, could probably benefit from having an ops or a DPM person dealing with the ops side of things, and then having a dedicated community manager, somebody who has experience with building communities. I mean, if you've got an open source design system, I'm guessing you folks had a community manager at GitLab, did you, on the design system, or?
No,
Oh.
no, but I will tell you, I will say that the thing about GitLab and that design team at that time and being there, we were all constantly in the issues and in the comments and responding, and very in tune with what that community was all about, and I in a way that I've never experienced at any other company at all. And we didn't need a community manager. We were the community, and we used GitLab to do our jobs. I mean, we used GitLab to design GitLab. So I think, I mean, I even used GitLab to write my book. I know that sounds crazy, but we did. Me and Tori did commits, back and forth and everything. So yeah, it was a really unique time and place. But I absolutely think that hits on exactly what I think is missing in a lot of places, because it does fall on the people on the team who already are overloaded, right? They have their day-to-day work. Like all of my designers are embedded in teams, and so they have their roadmap work, and then they have hopefully some time to do some other work, some blue sky work, maybe some creative thinking. Plus there's the design system. And then I want them to, be out there with a megaphone going, the design system is amazing. Like, it's a lot. That's a lot.
I mean, everybody has 300% capacity anyway, right? So it's fine.
Yeah, of course.
I realize that I've just been enjoying talking to you two for far too long, and we haven't got onto the audience questions yet. So I suppose I'm going to go to the audience questions, and then I'm going to come back to a final question right at the end. So thank you to everybody who has submitted questions so far. I think there's some really great ones in here. So let's see. I think we'll start with one for Sarah from RJ. So thanks, RJ. Have you found a particular approach to onboarding that resonates with the different audiences across your team?
Oh, goodness. For onboarding,
I'm guessing onboarding onto design tools and to the design system, I'm assuming, yeah. Well, I work in a all remote environment. So this is going to be very remote specific. But I have a document, a ramp up document. And what it does is it starts with, this is your role. This is, where this is the makeup of the team. So it gives kind of a list of everybody. And it links out. So every single thing, gosh, this goes back to my GitLab days. It really does. If you've ever seen the GitLab handbook, I'm really telling on myself here. But we have a document, and essentially I run you down and I onboard you to the processes. This is what it's like on a day. This is what it's like on a week. This is what it's like in a month. This is how we operate as far as this is our cycle. And then here are the tools that we use, and links out to where you can see them and how they're organized. For me, it's really important to have a bucket of these are the assets that you have, and I want you to get familiar with these assets, user journeys, personas, all of these things. And then here is the way that we organize and we work together as a team. And then start going that way. And I let people spend the first couple of days just looking at that. And at the bottom of the document, I ask them to ask questions, like just dump here and at me, and like, is there anything that doesn't make sense? Is there something you wish was here? And so you're constantly perfecting your onboarding with every new person that onboards, because they're telling you in the moment, not later, not 6 months later, like what would have been better? They're not going to remember. I want them to tell me in the moment, like this was confusing, or this was not valuable to me. And so we're constantly updating that onboarding document as we go. That's brilliant. Yeah, I think that makes 100% sense. And I'd actually like to see that onboarding document if you have it handy, just because I think I need a better one. So
I can send it over.
So one for Michelle, because I know that at Citrix you're working on quite a large scale there with a big team. So this one's from Kelly. Do you have any tips on communicating for tool changes and accommodating tools and changes generally on a global scale? So Kelly works in a company that has employees in many countries around the world. Just wondering if you had any learnings or any advice from your days at Citrix. Maybe repeating yourself from previous questions, but
I can definitely vary this answer. Yeah, no, this is a really great question. At Citrix, we had like 6 different time zones, and they were not convenient for like the entire team. So I think the big thing is, kind of what Sarah said, like communicating like early on, communicating several times. Like people, as much as you might communicate over Slack, they might not see the Slack message, but they might resonate, they might read email, but trying different ways of communicating, bringing up during meetings, letting them know early on that this is happening. You'll still need to like let them know continuously because they'll still ask, when is this happening? But I think the other thing is like with a global scale, like I think a lot of our teams were working with engineers in different ways, which was totally fine because it was working for them, but it's not the same every place. So we had to be very mindful of adjusting to that. So talking to people, how are you guys currently working with the team? What are you doing? What's the deliverables looking like? And then just making sure we kind of planned for all those like transitional use cases. So, we looked at like, okay, so we're going to stop delivering in this one design tool and, for the rest of the quarter or finish up these, like anything in progress, we'll continue to use the old tool. Anything that's new, we'll start with the new tool. And I think the other thing is like we did a lot of road shows like in time zones that were compatible to the employees. So like no one was having to get up super early or stay up super late to figure out what was going on, that they were in a fresher mindset to take in the information, ask questions. So it might take a little bit of work coordinating, but I think what was really nice is that if we come up with like one presentation, different people can give it and you don't have to come up with a separate presentation every time. And I think that was really helpful just in terms of people transitioning, like understanding like, okay, they're being heard, their needs are being met. So it wasn't like, oh, one time zone was favored more than the other, which made things a lot easier because it is complicated and it's hard.
I think it's interesting because one of the things that I've found in the past, and I don't actually think that I'm in the majority here, but I'm a big fan of allowing a fair amount of flexibility as well. There was one interesting point that you made there around how, especially when you're dealing with global teams, people have different processes and different ways of working because there are different, different people, but also you're dealing with different cultures and different working cultures. And I think there's a tendency to want to control things quite a lot when you're at a high level. and sometimes that is just a way of just constantly, it's like trying to, bash back a stream that's coming at you full against the current. It's a terrible idea. So I think that you do need to have that flexibility sometimes. And also it's a lot of it is just understanding, it's almost like having an agreement at a high level that how much flexibility you're going to allow.
For sure. Like I think like we definitely said as you're transitioning, doing different design deliverables, like, the people that you work with best, like, so however they're going to be most receptive, like it's up to you. But in terms of like, we did have to have some hard deadlines because we were on a subscription plan for one tool. So we couldn't extend that. Like it was just going to be, okay, March 31st, we're losing access to this tool completely. So that was like, the one major thing that we couldn't like be flexible on, which is tough. But I've been at places where, we've asked people to, nicely transition from one tool to another. And then years later, they still haven't transitioned to the tool. And that becomes problematic down the line. So I think, definitely being flexible, like within reason for sure, but understand that it's, you might have to have a hard deadline in there.
Yeah. I've got a good question, I think, for you, Sarah. Here we've got 10 minutes left, so I reckon we can fit it in. How do you
Are you
manage?
saying I answer really long? Is that what that?
No.
I know I
It's just that,
ramble.
you know,
I have
thing is,
ADHD. Okay, I can't help it.
you're in good company here.
Completely.
No, it's just that everything's sparking great conversation. That's the problem.
Okay, true.
So this one's from Nick. So thank you, Nick. How do you manage expectations? So, or do you have any tips for managing expectations? So obviously, you know, people want to think that everything will be perfect and beautiful and seamless and work perfectly straight out the box. And, you know, it'll only take a week or two. Yeah. Do you have any tips for that?
Yeah. I am a very pragmatic person, to the point where some people consider me to be on the negative side, but I'm not. I think I'm realistic. I think, I'm very hopeful, but I
Mm,
think that it's important to be realistic. And that's why I always start with, anytime I start anything like this, when we're talking about new tools or processes, I always start with what are our needs versus our wants and what are the
mhm.
constraints. And I find that starting there naturally helps manage expectations, because if you
Yeah.
have things that are in those categories and you have to select, obviously you're going to select on needs, and wants are going to come later, and then constraints are going to be a big part of that. Um, and again, that's again we're having that being very vocal and making sure that you're consistently, almost ad nauseum, putting out there what your goal is, who this is for, and why you're choosing what you're choosing, is going to help keep expectations where they should be and manage those expectations.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm just a very upfront, straight kind of person, so I find this to be the easiest thing, like the easiest part of the job for me.
Yeah.
um, I just, it comes very natural. I'm East Coast Boston, so we're very like to the point. Um, uh, but yeah, I really do think it is about that. You just have to be really upfront in the beginning and make sure that everything is out there, and ask people, make sure that when you leave a meeting, that you're on the same page, that you understood, you're coming out with the same expectations and the same understandings that everyone else is.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to leave thinking that it's one way and somebody else thinks it's another way, and you find out too late. Very, very important.
It's weird. It feels
Yeah.
like communication is the answer to everything at the moment.
Isn't it? I mean, tools don't solve problems. People do.
No.
We just use
Yeah.
the tools.
Yep.
So.
Oh, I'm getting that put on a t-shirt. So I think we do. So we have time for a final question for both of you. So first up, Michelle, give it to you. What's the most important advice if somebody was struggling with this process or transitioning or change with their team? What's the one piece of advice that you'd give?
Yeah, I think we've kind of talked about this throughout. Like, it's definitely communication, right? Like, so talking to your team and seeing like where the pain points are, what are their concerns and struggles, and seeing how, you might be able to address that. What's even better is if you can say, hey, like, what would you do if we, if you were in my shoes? A lot of times the team has really great ideas that you can leverage that can actually be better solutions than what you were thinking of, and getting that feedback is really helpful, just to make sure you're doing the transition in a way that is really helpful for the team and alleviates their pain points, and it makes it really smooth. So definitely, as we've been saying all throughout, is like talking to people early on, definitely talking to people, being open to their feedback, and I think that's the best you can definitely do.
Cool. Anything more to add, Sarah, for one big piece of advice that isn't just communicate?
This sounds so pithy and just obvious, but and it kind of is what Michelle is saying, but like, people want to be heard.
Mm,
Like, I think at the end of the day, especially when you're dealing with people are in this field because they love it. There's
yeah.
this, I mean, there's a lot of bullshit we put up with, excuse my language, but you know, and at the end of the day, we do it because we love it, and we have strong opinions and ideas, and we get very excited about it. And I think we all are aware that, you know, everything we want and desire is not going to happen, but I would like to be heard. And I would like people to take it seriously when I say that I think this is important, or I think that is important. And I think, as whether I'm a manager or a lead, a director, I want to make sure that people know I hear them and that I'm taking that into account. And if we can't do what they want us to do, or it doesn't fit into what we need right now, that they understand why. That it's not just, you know, or we can't do that right now, or, you know, putting it off. People need to understand why, so that then they're along for the ride. They're like, okay, you know, maybe I disagree, but all right, I get it. You know, it's not right now. And I even tell people sometimes, like, you know what, not right now, but I want you to bring that back up in 6 months. Like 6 months, I want to talk about that again, because I know there are some constraints right now that make that really hard. That's really the most important thing.
100%, and you're getting a lot of love in the chat right now, so that's I think that you possibly struck a chord there. Thank you so much, Sarah and Michelle, for joining today. It was a fantastic chat. I could sit here for hours probably talking about this, but unfortunately we only have 3 more minutes, so I should probably wrap it up. Thank you so much to the folks who joined today. We got a nice big bunch of people in from all over the world, and some fantastic questions. So thank you very much to those who asked questions. If your question wasn't answered here, then please go and join Zeros, because we will be able to answer those after the fact. I can probably shoot you an invite as well, Sarah. I don't know if you're in there already.
I am. I was just posting, if you want my document, just send me a private message in Zeros, and I'll send it to you.
Perfect.
Anybody here that asked.
Perfect. I'm just going to share my screen again, just so I can post up. I think I glitched out before this shared properly before. So we have a couple of upcoming webinars. One of them there is actually down as your CTA in the webinar itself. So that's the next How We Document webinar, which is all around scaling design systems. So all around growing your team. Which is very exciting. And then, as I mentioned as well, that we have this special Amplify webinar, which is around the Women in Tech Wikipedia Editathon, which is happening on the 22nd of March. Michelle, actually, do you want to speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, sure. So it's interesting. Only 19% of biographies in Wikipedia are of women. So there is definitely a lot missing, and especially women in tech. So a lot of our prominent like book authors and you know, heroes in design, development, data don't have Wikipedia pages. And it might not seem like a big deal, but what's really interesting is that a lot of like AI is trained through Wikipedia, or Google gets their answers by scraping Wikipedia. So, you know, when they're not able to get this information because it's not there, people are missing out on really great people, really great accomplishments, not able to have really good discussions because it's missing a huge chunk of our field. So the Editathon is to help create and update Wikipedia pages so they do show up when AI is being taught and Google is doing the searches to get more information in. So we would love for you to participate. It's really fun. It's easy, low effort. Would love to have you all join. So yeah.
It's fantastic. I'm really looking forward to it. Fantastic. Thank you so much to you both. Thank you to everybody who joined. And I think we've just hit 6 o'clock in London. So I think it is time to say goodbye and see you at the next webinar.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.